Scottish Disability Sport realises that coaches make a real difference to learning or improving in a sport for children, athletes and players with a disability, which is no different from their peers. Coaches need to be confident and competent when coaching young people, athletes and players with a physical, sensory or learning impairment, again just the same as coaching mainstream children, athletes and players.
The principles of coaching are the same. It's still about looking at the individual, looking what they can do and what they may be able to achieve and trying to work with that athlete to achieve that. Yes, there are always issues around the disability, but the principles of coaching disabled athletes are the same as coaching able-bodied athletes.
You still assess where they are, you work on what they have, their strengths and weaknesses, try and develop their weaknesses and improve their performance. So it's exactly the same. Adaptations maybe in the process that you use is what's important.
PE teachers shouldn't be afraid to include people with a disability, because there's nothing stopping people with a disability doing the same sport. It can always be adapted to the disability. There's always ways around it.
When I work with athletes with disabilities, I don't think about them as having a disability, I think about them as athletes. If you've got a player with cerebral palsy, for instance, and they've got a weakness down the left-hand side, I don't think about that as their disability down the left-hand side. I think they might lack a little bit of ability there. So what we do is we try to encourage them, open up neurological pathways. If the ball comes in, if they're really young, they maybe have not got the confidence to control it with their weakened side. So they control it with their right, take a little touch with their left, and then play the pass again with their right.
We have to be flexible, we have to think on our feet. If one thing isn't working, we have to change it. We have to, for example, if a student can't hold a hockey stick in a hockey lesson, it may be that we need to tie the hockey stick to the chair to allow them to take part in the lesson that way.
You just kind of look at what you can do and what other people can do. So they just try and get, like, for your experience, what is easier for you. That's what makes it better. The other people that can walk aren't allowed to tackle wheelchairs, which makes it a bit more easier, because it means you're not trying to keep the ball away from them, because it's quite hard to keep it away from them because they can move a lot faster than you. So.
Get to know the child. Find out what they can do, find out what they can't do, and try and include that child as much as you can. There is going to be times where, depending on the child's disability, they might not be able to do exactly the same task that the rest of the children are doing, but that's absolutely fine. As long as you're making sure that the child is still involved, maybe doing a similar task or at a different pace, just make sure that the child's included at all times if they can be, and not just sitting down, maybe being the umpire or the referee all the time. Get them as included as much as you can.
When I wasn't mainstream, you know, I was kind of sidelined a bit because of my disability, you know, when they were doing like the running, the football and so forth, well, just you sit here and watch, so it wasn't a great experience.
There wasn't really many things I could do at PE that the rest of the class were doing, and a lot of the time I was left just to kind of do my own thing, so it was handy that we had another hall that I could use at the school where I did my own sort of stuff just that I could do myself, but obviously it was disappointing not to be able to take part with the other children in my class.
Primary school, I went to 2 different primary schools, both mainstream. I would partake in maybe a little bit of basketball now and then, because I was walking at the time as well, which was different. And then for the rest of the time I was either taking an extra class to draw or catch up with homework or something, and maybe just sitting and watching with some of the other teams that weren't playing at the time. Secondary school, I ended up in a wheelchair. The only things that I would really do again were basketball or badminton, but then it made it difficult for the rest of the classes because all the students had to watch that they didn't run into me. I think that was quite hard because nobody could show me the right thing to do because nobody else was in a wheelchair to show me that's what you could do.
Yeah, I was always really involved in sport in my school, through athletics and football, tennis, anything I could do really. And then once I had my condition when I was 13, obviously it was a lot harder to get involved in sport in schools. There wasn't anyone else really in my school that was sporty, that was in the chair. So it was something new for my PE teachers to deal with. They always tried to get me involved any way they could, just in any way possible. I would try and get involved in the classes and try and do as much as anyone else that was in the class could.
In PE, my teachers were very kind of wanting me to try more. They were always saying, right, well, you're not sitting down, just go for it. So I did, and I ended up on the school basketball team, played regularly for them, and also I represented the school in a rugby sevens championship against able-bodied players. That was the same with the basketball team, it was against able-bodied players. And we won the rugby sevens out of Renfrewshire. The teachers have always been great, and they've always pushed me and everyone and my friends on.
They didn't look at me as if, oh look, there's a guy with a disability. They looked at me as a guy with a lot of ability. And luckily enough, with friends and that around me, I managed to do well and keep at it. So I was happy for that, and that's basically my experiences of PE at high school.
We need a shared philosophy and set of principles of inclusive coaching that will influence and guide practice. It is possible that not all coaches will work with disabled athletes and players. However, all coaches should, as part of their training, be prepared to meet the needs of all communities, including children, athletes and players with impairments. Several sports are making excellent inroads into their sports coaching awards being inclusive.
Inclusive coaching is very much case of including disabled athletes in a mainstream setting, but again, the coach trying to adapt the sport or the practice to suit that athlete, to include everybody.
My idea of an inclusive PE lesson within Ashcraig School is that everybody takes part, regardless of their ability or disability, they all take part in the same activity. So if we're doing hockey, they're all doing hockey. If we're doing basketball, they're all doing basketball. If we're swimming, they're all swimming. Everybody takes part to the best of their ability.
Well, Jack's primary 5, he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, which obviously affects his movement. Jack's really good. Jack gets involved in anything that I ask him to do. He'll give it his best shot. Sometimes he'll maybe find a task too difficult, but we've got that relationship where he'll just come and tell me that he finds it too hard. He'll try his best, and if not, then we need to just sort of adapt the task so that he can do it. For example, today what we did was we were working on the overarm throw to begin with, which gets us ready for the overarm serve. Now, the rest of the children, they were the same distance apart. When it came to Jack, he found that quite difficult, so it was just a simple step of moving him closer to his partner, still doing exactly the same task, but just a little bit closer, just to increase his confidence. And then if he got better at the task, he could move back a little bit. My biggest challenge to achieve an inclusive environment within the school would probably be time. Sometimes you want to spend more time with that individual child within your class, but you realise that you might have 28, 29 other children. So I don't think it's fair you just focusing all your energies on one child when you've got other children as well. If there was 2 of me, it'd be absolutely great. You know, I could clone myself. One of me could work with the child and one could work with the rest of the class. So it's getting that balance, I would say, is really, really tricky. But I'm getting there, hopefully.
Inclusive coaching should mean kids with a disability training alongside mainstream athletes in the same club environment. They can then access that locally rather than having to travel to a specific disability club, and to keep them in the local area, training with mainstream is the ideal scenario.
Inclusive coaching is taking the young athlete and having them swim in or alongside their peers. Generally, long-term athlete development goes along the same principles whether you're a mainstream athlete or an athlete with a disability. So you need the same number of water hours, you need to be doing the same things, learning the same techniques, and it's fitting them in where best you can within your club environment. It may be in a laying down, it may be alongside with some adaptations made to the set you're doing.
Inclusive coaching is about effective communication techniques, ability to adapt and modify, differentiation, adaptation and progression, functional ability, focus on what the individual can do, ability rather than disability, observe athlete and player closely, and ask questions how impairment impacts on ability to master a sports skill. Understand and use the coaching environment. Appropriately modify and manipulate. All aspects of the inclusion spectrum. The inclusion spectrum is a physical activity model that involves children, athletes and players of all levels of ability in different forms of physical activity including PE and sports. The engagement of all participants at an appropriate level of skill development is the aim behind the model. Altering the environment, method of delivery or presentation may be all that is required to achieve the desired outcomes. The inclusion spectrum encourages coaches and those involved in the delivery of physical activity, including PE and sport, to consider different methods of delivery. By adopting different approaches, coaches and others can address individual learner needs and expectations within the group. Every learner is important, and the inclusion spectrum challenges situations where more able learners benefit and those whose skills are still developing lose out. The inclusion spectrum determines that disability sport and mainstream sport may fall into one or several of the following activity models. Open activity. Every athlete or player trains, participates or competes on equal terms without adaptation or modification. Modified activity. Every child, athlete or player is involved in the same task with changes to rules, playing areas or equipment. Parallel activity. Every child, athlete or player participates in the same activity, but different groups participate in different ways and at different levels. Separate activity. Children, athletes and players with a disability participate separately, either as individuals or in teams. The inclusion spectrum encourages coaches and those involved in the delivery of physical activity, including PE and sport, to consider different methods of delivery to ensure children, players and athletes with a disability are included in physical activity, PE and sport.
In terms of what makes a good coach, I think hopefully you're looking at people who are able to observe what's happening, analyse what the athletes are doing relative to the sport, and be able to try and make adjustments to support the person to become as good as they want to be.
There's many attributes that make up a good coach, but perhaps the key ones are staying positive, no matter what's happening in the pool beside you, focusing on the individual and where they want to go.
Coaches can learn, technique, you can go and learn, you can read books, but to understand the athletes and be able to put that across, whether it's mainstream or disability, for me I think that's what makes a good coach.
Is obviously knowledge, but I think listening to your athletes, getting to know your athletes and knowing what makes them tick, and knowing when to pull back and knowing when to actually get stuck in, and listening to what they have to say. That's certainly been the most valuable thing that I've heard.
A good coach will be someone that you saw working earlier on. So Martin Dugan, one of our players from the first team, has gone through his level 1 coaching qualification last year. I see him as a very good coach at the moment. 1 year down the line, he's taken what he's learned on the course and put that into practice. So now he's the head coach of our under-10 team, and those kids love him because of his technical knowledge, but also because of his playing ability and being a fantastic role model as a 2.5 player with cerebral palsy that plays in the first team.
A good coach is somebody that can pass on their experiences and get the best out of the student and make them improve on every single session that they coach in.
But I think also just sticking by your athletes, sticking by people that has potential, that really wants it, and you can tell. And if you stick by them, there's every chance they can do it. It took me a few years, and the coaches have really stuck behind me. So
I think a good coach consists of somebody who's loyal, somebody who's hard-working, would put a lot of dedication into their time. And I think you've got to understand, it's not just understanding the sport, I think just understanding disability is key, and treating everyone the same. There's been a lot of times where people treat me different because I'm in a wheelchair. I think you've got to have an open mind, and you've got to understand what it's like.
I would like to think it's the same as any coach, that when you've worked with people as closely as you tend to do as a coach, the important thing is their success, not your success, but what they achieve out of that, whether they achieve success within an international setting or whether they just achieve what is really within their capability. And I think from a coaching perspective, and certainly from my perspective, what I'm looking for is to have the opportunity to get people to achieve as much as they can within you know, the skill base that they have, or improve the skill base to allow them to achieve what they want to achieve.
We want to develop a new generation of genuinely inclusive coaching through coach education and coach development in partnership with Scottish governing bodies. For those proactive coaches who wish to learn more and go beyond the basics or to specialise, there will always be a need for standalone technical workshops, whether this learning is assessed or considered as continuous professional development. This is consistent with the participant-centred philosophy of Coaching Scotland and currently embedded within coach education delivery and development.
I think the biggest frustration at the moment is having enough players to work with. I think the way the education system works at the moment is there's a lot of young people moved into mainstreaming, which is right. However, there are a lot of people, especially people who are involved in boccia or could be involved in boccia, who have got severe physical disabilities, don't get the opportunity because not enough people know about it. And I think that's probably a frustration. We work with a very small group of people, and it would be great from a coaching point of view to have more people to work with, because it pushes on the players that you already have.
A number of our potential players are in mainstream education, which is fantastic for those children educationally. When it comes to the sporting environment, it's not so good for them. So for a lot of mainstream PE teachers, a lot of mainstream class teachers, they don't realise that wheelchair basketball's out there for wheelchair users in their class, or people with mobility issues. If we could get that message across to these mainstream classroom teachers, that would be a big way for us to recruit more players into the sport.
The biggest challenge that we do have is that we can't get the message out to the players that there's opportunities. There's kids in school, there's students at college, at university, people in at work that don't even know that the football opportunities exist. And I suppose that's one of the biggest frustrations. If they only knew that we existed, we would get them into our programmes, whether that be at participation level, competitive level, or right at the top at international. I want them to know about it so they can come in and enjoy the game of football.
Biggest frustration is getting other coaches involved, making sure that they can coach athletes with a disability, trying to explain to them that it's not any different from coaching mainstream athletes, that they just have to talk to the athletes a bit more and just adapt slightly what they're doing, but not a great deal, and the coaching is similar.
To actually grow it, we need to grow the people that are helping it and look at the coach education side of it and make sure that we're actually giving people the opportunity to become experts in wheelchair tennis and not stumbling on it as I did. And although I've kind of learnt as I've gone along, if we have sort of opportunities where there's knowledge out there which can be tapped into, then people can be fast-tracked to become knowledgeable at it.
My top tip for coaches would be make sure that your sessions are fun. If the athletes are having fun at your sessions, then they'll come back. You can teach them the technical stuff, but if that's done in a fun way, they'll be back for the next session.
Not to be scared of including an athlete with a disability. Talk to the athlete. Communication is a great key. The athletes know their disability, they know their ability, they know what they can and can't do.
Get out there and do it. It's the most rewarding coaching that you can do. You really have to think outside the box and use your knowledge, and the reward that you get out of it and what the athletes get out of it is second to none. So get out there and start coaching.
If you would like to find out more about the coaching and education opportunities SDS can offer, then please contact us directly for more information.